In episode 5, to his shock, Loki opens up his eyes, and he's at the TVA, although nobody else is there. As he walks around, he time slips, and he's at an empty TVA, but he sees himself looking at a TVA manual. Before he can really even say hello, he time slips back. He walks to that room, picks up the manual, and then he hears himself say hello. So he's time slipping a few minutes into the future at this point. As he looks through the TVA manual, branches of the timeline start to invade the TVA, and Loki knows he has to get out of there. So he sticks the manual in his pocket, and he lucks out, because even though he can't control the time slipping, he does time slip out of there. He time slips to a part of the branch timeline, 1962 on Alcatraz Island, and that's where he meets Casey. Casey was a prisoner on Alcatraz, and he was planning to escape, but when Loki sees him and calls him Casey, the guy doesn't know who the hell he is. His name's Frank, and he's never seen Loki before. He doesn't really have a chance to explain further into detail what's going on because he time slips again. This time to a McDonald's parking lot, but before he can even get his bearings straight, he time slips to a watercraft store, and then he quickly time slips to a place called the 25 Time Theater. Each of those spots, he's not there for more than a couple seconds. His next time slip is to 2012 New York, on the branch timeline, where he meets a children's doctor. But the children's doctor is Hunter B15, a variant. He's not able to explain himself to her because he once again time slips, this time back to that water sports store where there is a very familiar face, guy's name's Don, and he's finally on a jet ski. It's Mobius. This time Loki's actually able to stay a little bit and talk. But just like with Frank, he doesn't remember him. And before Loki can explain himself, this could shock you, he time slips again, this time to Pasadena, California, 1994, where he meets a science fiction writer whose day job is a theoretical scientist, and it's OB. Loki explains the problem that he's finding. He has to go back in time to a place that no longer exists, but OB tells him that's going to be next to impossible. He tells him that his best bet is to control his time slipping, but the thing is, Loki can't control it. He tells Loki that this really comes down to science and fiction. With science, it's all what and how, but with fiction, it's why. And all of this sounds like fiction, so he asks Loki, why do you need to do this? Loki tells him that if he can't save the TVA from being destroyed, then he can't save everybody from what's coming. To OB, that sounds like a pretty big why, so he tells Loki, well, then try to control it. And Loki tries, but he fails. OB, though, has a really good idea. He tells him that all of his friends have an aura, and since they were in that moment in time has an aura. So if he gets all of his friends together, he should be able to use that aura to go back to that moment in time and hopefully save the TVA. The issue is they don't have a temp pad, which means that OB would have to invent one from scratch, but the good news is Loki has a TVA manual, so he hands it over to him. He's planning on sitting and just waiting and helping out OB any way he can, but he time slips. This time to the house of Don, a.k.a. Mobius. And Don's pretty surprised to see him because he just thought he was a weird customer. But Loki starts to explain to him how they actually know each other and how this has to do with time and saving all of this. And to Don, who's a single father of two, this sounds like absolute crazy talk. I mean, he's ready to call the cops. He explains to Don that Mobius is his real name, and he comes from a place called the TVA, a place he really, really cares about. Don still isn't buying any of it until all of a sudden a portal opens up and OB walks through. Loki makes mention that he can't believe that OB was able to get this done in a couple of minutes, but OB says it didn't take me a couple of minutes, it took me 14 months, and I lost my wife. But hey, what now? Using OB's mock temp pad, they're able to show Don/Mobius that they need his help and they can drop him back at any point in time. So while to Don, he would miss his two boys, to his boys, they'd be none the wiser. They could drop him back to the moment where he walked away. And if he truly cares about them, he'll come and help because without his help, then none of it's going to matter. It's pretty convincing because as Loki's saying this, Don and Loki are watching the conversation they literally just had. So Don decides to agree. The next step is convincing the doctor/Hunter B15, which Loki is able to do, and then convincing Frank / Casey, who just escaped from Alcatraz, so he's looking to get anywhere but San Francisco. The last person he needs to get is Sylvie. He goes to the location of the McDonald's parking lot, and he starts off by saying, "This is going to sound crazy," because nobody else knew who he was. But to Loki's shock, Sylvie recognizes him. She remembers all of it. They decide to go off and have a drink, and Loki explains how he found Mobius, Casey, Hunter B-15, and they don't remember anything. And Sylvie says, yeah, they're finally back in their real lives. But Loki mentions how they now should have a choice. Yes, before they were kidnapped, they didn't have a choice. But now, well, they should. They should have a choice on whether or not to help out. And while all of them have agreed to do that, Sylvie doesn't want to. She prods Loki on explaining why he even wants to do this, and finally he admits, I want my friends back. To which Sylvie says, well, there you go. We're both selfish. Loki heads back to the TVA without Sylvie, and he lets everybody know, doesn't matter. You guys can go back to where you came from. But before they can actually do that, Sylvie shows up. And it's not really by choice. She headed to a record store and was kind of just zoning out when the record store was invaded by branch timelines and completely destroyed. So she had to use the temp pad to go somewhere, and she figured the TVA was the best spot. When she arrives, she realizes just how serious the situation is, and she tells Loki, yeah, everything's falling apart. The branches are dying, and I don't know what it means, but there's got to be something we can do. And Loki says, yeah, we can go back, and we can stop the loom from melting down. All of us are together. We have the coordinates to head back to that moment in time. But unfortunately, they don't have the temp pad that OB created because it's gone. They start questioning the one prisoner in the room, but then he disappears, just like the branch timelines. And then OB disappears. And one by one, they just start disappearing. Loki starts grasping at the final person to disappear, who is Sylvie, and suddenly he time slips back to a few minutes ago, when Sylvie had just arrived, and he realizes he did it. He controlled his time slipping. It was never about where, when, or what. It was about who. And now that I know that, I'm able to go back to that moment. I can rewrite the story. And sure enough, he time slips, and he's back at the TVA with OB, ready to do just that. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry. It'll be up in a day or two.